Hello, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on generative AI and its impact on businesses. We are excited to discuss this topic with our thought leaders from a variety of business functions. Today, we'll be talking about how organizations can leverage AI to improve efficiency, increase customer satisfaction, and gain competitive advantage. We will also explore challenges organizations may face when incorporating AI into their operations and strategies. And at the end of the session, we hope you will have a better understanding of what AI can mean for your business today and possible implications for the future. So get ready to open your minds and join us on this journey as we explore the possibilities that AI has to offer businesses. Now, I have to share that that entire thing that I just went through was generated by Jasper and AI. When I asked it, write me opening remarks for a webinar on generative AI. So there you go. That's an example of how it can put words directly into your mouth. And we will talk more about that through this discussion. So I am joined by Stephen Jones, our head of cybersecurity here at DataPrize, because AI certainly has a lot of implications from a security perspective. And my friendly Jasper AI tool did not put that in my opening remarks, but we are going to talk a lot about the cybersecurity implications around this. And then I'm also joined by Dave Schwartz, who's SVP here at DataPrize and also leads our Wireless Watchdogs business unit. So we each come from different perspectives on how we use AI, how we see it shaping business. So it's sure to be a great conversation. And we do hope, just like my AI friend said, that you come away with some interesting tidbits. So with that, I will get into the first question. So we're all talking from the baseline, and that is, Dave, how do you define generative AI? We've heard about AI for a long time, but what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so specifically, and I'm glad we're doing this, but specifically, generative AI is basically AI that's going to go and generate content, and so it's really focused on algorithms that are going to go create content such as images, video, music, text, even a lot of the tasks, simple tasks that we're using in business today. And so it's basically sort of like the high level overarching and probably the most public facing version of AI that we're really seeing from a consumer standpoint today.
So Jones, you want to tell us a little bit more about how it works?
Yeah,
Get the
sure.
conversation going.
Thanks, Dave, for kicking that off. So generative AI, as Dave mentioned, is just one subset of artificial intelligence, and it's used to create new data from patterns in existing data that it was trained on. So what happens is the AI is analyzing a prompt, and generative AI typically begins with a prompt. You're asking the AI to do something, to complete a task, or to generate something. And then under the covers, it's actually using a set of complex neural networks to create an original and realistic response based on the training data it's been provided with. And the whole intent is to provide a response that is convincingly authentic. So underneath generative AI in these complex neural networks, the training models are iteratively improving the realism of responses the longer that they run.
So every question we type into there, we're just making it smarter and smarter.
Yeah, it's actually learning from our patterns. It's learning from its training data how to get more convincingly authentic and realistic in its responses.
Fascinating what it's going to be as it continues to grow up. So we sort of laid the foundation for what it is. Now let's talk about some of the benefits and different use cases. So, reducing time, output, efficiency, optimization. Each one of these have implications of what it can do and across the business. So, I can kick us off from a marketing perspective on how we're utilizing it and the capabilities. So, I shared that quick snippet of, you can go in there and it can be a great way to start you with some content or some words, right? So from, tactically like blog articles that we're publishing, if we're looking for inspiration on what topics should we write on around AI or cybersecurity, give me 10 hot topics. it'll give us a list of topics. If we want to write an article and we know what paths we want to go down, we can put into it, we want to write an article about Azure migration, and then add follow-on questions. And it helps give us a lot of starting content. Now, the trick is we have to make sure that content is valid and useful, but it really is going to change the way marketing organizations and business as a whole create their content and the information that they put out there. It may result in an influx of a lot more information because the barriers to entry for creating this type of content have just been dramatically lowered. And so there are going to be other ways that, businesses and marketing professionals have to look to differentiate and make sure that what they're producing and sharing out there is relevant. So that's one of the ways that I've seen it transforming from a marketing perspective, how we're thinking and how we approach content creation as an example. I'm sure, Jones, you're seeing a lot of different use cases as well. What are you seeing?
Yeah, our team is using this quite successfully to help generate software or code for various tasks. Now, the obvious disclaimer here is that you need to really understand how to read code because these generative AI models are not foolproof. They are not necessarily 100% accurate all the time, but the power of these platforms to take a prompt, to take a plain English sentence, right, and use natural language processing to extract out how the user wants the system to build a snippet of code. We've got some real world examples of our engineers asking ChatGPT, which is one of the generative AI platforms that's extremely popular at the moment, to generate PowerShell scripts that do a series of tasks in a very specific order with specific folder names or file paths or things like that. And within a matter of seconds, it's able to spit it out and fully comment the code as well. So this is really reducing the barrier of entry for people getting into scripting and coding projects, but it's also able to help supplement or increase efficiencies for teams that are very well versed. But instead of taking a half hour to write this script, you can describe it in a sentence or two. A generative AI platform can potentially save you hours of work.
And you can continue to add new prompts and new questions to continue to refine it and get it closer to what you're looking for, which has been a really interesting experience. Dave, what about you? How are you using it?
Yeah, so both myself and several folks on my team and predominantly have used ChatGPT of recent, but are using it really to build frameworks around a lot of the things that we need to get started on. So when we bring on, this is just a use case recently, say a new role in a position we've never had before, kind of helping develop and frame out ideas and concepts on, what would be the right KPIs for this role. And it'll generate, a laundry list of choices. And then from there, we're using it to really help fine tune and get down specifically into, okay, these are the ones that we agree fit this role. And so we're using it for a lot of things like that. We've used it recently to help put some slide content together for some of our decks. Again, very high level, not specific to necessarily our organization, but really the industry as a whole that we're in. And so that's helped a lot in just the speed at which we can really create this content and present it and have it in front of folks, whether it's customers, employees, whomever it may be. Things that would often take, several days or even weeks in some cases are taking, 30 seconds, a handful of minutes. And as long as we, to Jones's point on the code as an example, as long as we're really looking and reading the content and vetting that the content looks correct, is accurate, doesn't have any incorrect biases or anything like that, sensitive data, right? Things like that. It's been a really valuable tool for us to get really simple tasks done in a very quick manner.
Yeah, it's like having a friend that you can quickly brainstorm with, or a business partner that you can just bounce ideas off of, and it gives you sort of starting points of paths that you can follow. It's been one of the experiences that sometimes it's just that little bit of starter fluid that you need to send you down building out content or frameworks or code. There's so many different ways and use cases that it can be used in a business.
Yeah,
So,
and I, just on that, I've personally used it quite a bit in a conversational sense. I mean, we'll use it as a starting point to create something, and it will trigger more interest or taking that topic in a slightly different direction on what I'm researching. And then all of a sudden I'll have a thread of, 10 questions and answers that I've gone back and forth with, Chat GPT on to help really drive to something that's incredibly valuable. And that's been it is like a personal buddy or assistant that can get things done quickly. And that's just not something that you could do through, Google Chrome or any browser for that matter. It just doesn't operate in that same way. So having a tool like this has been very helpful.
yeah, and the other part, you have to know the information that you're getting back, the accuracy, and we'll sort of talk about that. Obviously, that's one of the challenges. And then the other part of it is that component of, as employees start to use it more and more, understanding what is authentic from them versus what was AI generated, and then gaining confidence in the information that's put forth. But before we dive into that, one component that clearly stands out is that we are feeding these things, and going back to what Joan said, we're feeding it a lot of information, potentially a lot of confidential information or non-public information. I mean, I know one of the tools specifically says not to share confidential information, but people don't always recognize and safeguard information as they need to, which opens up a whole host of cybersecurity, data protection, and other considerations. So, Jones, let's talk a little bit about, there are many paths we can probably follow from the cybersecurity risk perspective, but you can start whichever one you think is the most relevant.
Yeah, so I think the place I'd like to start is the one that I ultimately don't want to see happen, which is just blocking these things outright. I think they are a net positive in a business context. It really comes down to businesses understanding what role they may play in the business and accommodating them, really. So blocking them, I don't think is the right answer. This tends to be a knee-jerk reaction to new things, is to just try to block them. What that does is it really just forces users to find ways around it, around your block, to be able to use the resources. And that opens up a whole host of other potentially dangerous situations. The next thing we have is, just like everything else in cybersecurity, is user education is often the very first stop. So really educating users on what generative AI is, when it's appropriate to use, how to use it effectively and appropriately. All of these things are going to go a long way toward ensuring that any sensitive information, proprietary data, intellectual property that your business may have doesn't end up getting pasted into a generative AI model, where it could reside in logs long term. It could make it into the model and be used as future training material, which you really don't want to have happen. There are some other technological things that you can do. Unfortunately, because of the nature of how most of these AI platforms work, it's really about users typing text or pasting text into the web page. And there's very few things you're going to do to stop that. Things like keyloggers, very intrusive, very data heavy, and difficult to cull through after the fact. But then you also do have technologies like DLP, or data loss prevention, that can analyze things like data that is put into the clipboard, that's copy and pasted into applications, or that's sent or exchanged between applications. DLP could be used to help limit exposure for certain keywords, triggers, or data types. But overall, I think user education is probably one of the more effective ways. It's, what we lean on from a cybersecurity perspective with annual awareness training already. I think generative AI or AI in general is going to become another topic that gets added to user awareness to ensure that employees understand how to use these tools responsibly, ethically, and appropriately.
And as you say that, I'm sure information security policies across all companies need to now be revisited and have parameters and guidance around this in addition to building the training programs. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think so. This is one of those things that's probably going to take a little while for things like that to catch up to technology, because this technology is just being rolled out incredibly quickly. There are hundreds and hundreds of generative AI platforms and applications that are being made live. They're huge investment streams. Lots of the big finance houses are investing heavily in AI. 2023 is going to be the year of AI. So yeah, I think it's going to take a little bit of time, but I agree, Mary Beth, that policies are going to have to be adjusted. Training is going to have to be implemented, and I suspect it'll be, towards the end of the year that we see this becoming more commonplace as businesses are realizing the impact of these platforms on their workforce.
yeah, and to talk about just there being so many and so many subscription services. So I mentioned Jasper, that's the sort of marketing content AI platform that we've been using. I mean, it's inexpensive to sign up for it, which, is valuable, but it also shows that the proliferation is going to be broad. And then just last night, my daughter found another one. She's 11, and she's like, look what it can do. I can just type in, write an article about gymnastics, and it gives me 100 free words. So it's really both going to change the educational components, but the business components as well, because generations, and not even generations, everyone's going to have these barriers of entry removed from a writing perspective. Which one other item that we talked about beyond the cybersecurity is then the quality and making sure the accuracy of the data, because it just goes out and scrapes so much information that it's then on the individual to make sure what it's proposing is actually accurate and is the right information before it's then propagated more broadly. But Dave, over to you on some of the other potential negative implications or challenges people need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think, moving past some of the cyber risks that Jones obviously touched on, I think one of the areas that I've had probably the largest concern around is just dependency on these systems. I think, overall, I think this is a great tool and value add. So I'm 100% with Jones on that I think there's more good from it than bad. But I think what happens is too much dependency is going to, or over reliance, I should say, is going to create some challenges from a employee standpoint, right? They're going to stop critically thinking as much. They're potentially going to risk the biases that may or may not come through from these generative AI tools. It's going to remove some potentially, I said critical thinking, but also creativity around work. And so those are sort of the areas that I have some immediate concerns. And then also really understanding, how do you use these tools correctly, right? So it's taking language that we input into the system and then making sense of that, using all these algorithms. And the reality is that how, just the three of us on this call would put in the same question, we would all word differently, right? And so that in itself is going to create different outputs that we need to be aware of, the implications around. And so if employees are ultimately not trained, or there aren't some sort of guardrails in place or guidance around these tools, the concern could be just um, taking the data at face value that it spits out and leveraging that, and not realizing that there's actually some flaws in that data as it relates specifically to what the objective was or what the business is, right? It's not that necessarily the data is flawed, but if you ask the wrong question, whether you realize it or not, the response is potentially going to come back incorrect. And so these are some of the areas that me and my team have had the most concerns of late, is how do we really encourage folks to use these tools when it makes sense, but not become over reliant on them to a point that it actually has negative implications down the line.
No, that's a great point. And the guardrails definitely ties to, the training and how employees use it, as well as that security component. So I guess, Jones, you have thoughts on, as someone starting to think about how they build those guardrails, I guess perhaps more from the cyber perspective, but how they frame their thinking, because I know there's still a lot of work that has to be done on continuing to build those out, but where does someone start?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to understand as we're learning how to work with these AI tools is really, I guess, piggybacking on what Dave said, is that some of these generative AI tools can be very confidently wrong about the information that they're putting out, and they're only as good as the data that they've been trained on is the ultimate answer. So understanding that they're very powerful tools, but that they have a very wide opportunity for misuse and abuse, I think is something to understand, but that they really can be very beneficial. So I think it's a lot about really educating yourself. To Dave's point, the prompt is going to be, I think, something that's going to be really talked about quite a lot in the coming year. Prompt engineering is the term I've heard used for folks who are really studying how to manipulate these AI engines with the way that they're asking a question and giving it a set of criteria and terms that it needs to abide by. For example, there are some folks who have figured out how to circumvent ChatGPT's ethical limitations by feeding it a set of prompts that tell it to ignore its ethical obligations and limitations. And those things actually persist in the system. It's learned how to recall that prompt over and over again. So this is where, again, these things are very powerful. And if the wrong people have access to the wrong parts of these systems, you can really get a lot of very unethical, immoral, illegal type responses or suggestions from these systems.
It's really fascinating the path that can go down, because I'd also heard someone give an example of trying to use one of these tools to get it to find a way in to hack an organization and sort of setting it on the path towards that, which is a little scary.
Well, I mean, like any new technology, it's usually the criminals that are driving the development and adoption of a lot of these things, because they have the largest motive. So we see this today. A lot of generative AI is being used to circumvent security, to write exploit code. I have security researcher friends who are using it to literally write exploit code for WordPress plugins. I was talking to a friend yesterday who was doing just that. He found a flaw in a WordPress plugin and was able to ask ChatGPT to develop an exploit code for it, and is able to now manipulate this plugin. And 30 seconds worth of asking this prompt and spitting it out, and he's now able to go compromise websites, right? So that's one example. There are lots of others. Even getting into things like deepfakes, where they're putting fake video together that makes it appear as if a person is saying or doing something. I think this is going to be another unfortunate reality, but we have to realize that bad actors almost always pioneer these tools. They almost always are the first early adopters to these things. So, we're going to see some negative stories come out of this, but the same can be said for almost any technology that's come out in the last decade. It's, the hackers and everybody else are usually the first on board figuring out how to manipulate it.
Yeah, and the other one we talked about is phishing emails. It's a great way, for lack of a better word, for phishers to stop using things like kindly or terms that really stand out as being phishing emails. I mean, they've gotten better year over year, but there are still certain things that will catch your eye that aren't authentic. And this is just an easier way for them to be able to write a phishing email in an authentic voice that doesn't have as many of those sort of flags. So, which then goes to users having to be even more astute and prepared and able to identify the other trademarks within a type of phishing email.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I'm most concerned about in the immediate, Mary Beth. That's a very interesting topic. Is just that the potential to open up social engineering and phishing to, for example, non-native English speakers, right? And I'm speaking in this from an English-speaking context. This obviously can be done in other languages in other countries as well, but non-native English speakers with the ability to put together a basic prompt can now generate very realistic English-speaking text that can be used in any number of social engineering situations. So I think to your point, that is going to make everybody's job a bit more difficult to differentiate. One of the hallmarks that I teach when I do user awareness training, if I'm teaching employees or other businesses, is to look for improper English, to look for words that don't belong. And I think things like ChatGPT, which are free to use, are going to make that that indicator, less and less common.
Dave, anything you want to add on other implications or business considerations that companies need?
I mean, I think, through all the topics we sort of covered, the one that does continue to stand out, Jones hit on it with, continuing to put in content into one of these systems that to circumvent, right, some of the restrictions it had in place. That same thing could be said about bias as well, right, in the data that we receive back. And so I think that is something that we definitely have to be considering every time we use these tools. Is don't just accept the data, but actually analyze the data and really think through if the data is actually reflective of how we as humans think, and it does not have inherently built into it biases that could be harmful in any number of ways. So that's one that continues to stand out because these systems are always learning and evolving. I think that's something we definitely want to keep an eye out on. And then the other one would be, intellectual property infringement is something to be considering when we use these tools. I know Jones hit on code as an example. That's one example, but there's so many examples of where we should be considering that the content that these systems are giving back to us could actually be, infringing on an organization's intellectual property in so many different ways. And then, for me in that example to then go use that, especially publicly, is now compounding the problem, right? And so things like that we need to be considering in our use cases.
Yeah, it's so true, because it doesn't cite or source anything that it gives back to you. So, there are things that I've read that I'm like, is there a chance this is plagiarized from somewhere? And if we use this as the base, we've now just plagiarized someone that we don't even realize. So it is a real consideration as businesses are using this and individuals are using this, that they understand that we don't know the source of this information. So it's incredibly important to keep that in mind. So if we move into takeaways from this conversation, I think some of the key items that we touched on is, and this is so early on, right? But understanding that employees are going to use this tool. It is coming whether you like it or not. Blocking it is likely not the path that businesses should go down. It's, the better path is figuring out how you put guardrails up, incorporate it into your learning, relook at your information security policies so that you're providing guidance on how employees should use it, what your expectations are some of the key areas that I know we've touched on. One other one that I would put in there, and I think it goes to expectations and training, is the expectation of transparency amongst teams so that your employees share with you when they're using these tools. And that's an expectation that we have across the marketing team. As an example, is that we talk about when something was generated by AI, we give it extra set of eyes, we validate it so that there's nothing that people are passing off as original works. So I think that's something that's really important for teams to talk about as well, because it changes the way you may look at the information, how you may vet it, how you may ensure that it is accurate. So that is something I would encourage also organizations to do, is that make sure if you have teams that are using it, they're very transparent about when AI touched a piece of code that they created or a blog article that they wrote or a job description that was put together, so that there aren't any surprises down the road. So that's my final thought on it. Who would like to go next?
I'll go first. My final takeaway here is that we're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. Generative AI and other AI is here to stay for the foreseeable future. It's only going to get better. It's only going to get more interesting. It's going to get more powerful. The next iterative models that are coming out are going to make what we have today look childish. Which means there will be a whole host of other uses and use cases for this. It will be powerful, it'll be easier to use. So the fact of the matter is, whether you like it or not, as a business owner, it is imperative that you figure out how to work with this, how to enable your business to exist alongside things like generative AI, and how best to prepare and train your workforce to use it ethically and responsibly, and to hold people accountable when they don't. So I think that's my big key takeaway, is it's here to stay. You got to figure out how to live with it.
And it'll be interesting what we're talking about 1 year from now to see how it continued to learn and develop and get smarter. Dave, over to you.
Yeah, I'll piggyback a little bit off of that. And we condense this into a fairly short window of time, because this is a topic that could go on for hours, if not days. I think that my big takeaway is from a business and ethical responsibility standpoint, I think there's a huge opportunity for learning and development teams to really emphasize and create content and courses and trainings around how to use these tools, right? We've talked about revising a cyber policy and coaching our teams directly, but companies who really invest in learning development, which fortunately we happen to be a part of one of those organizations, I think there's a big opportunity there for those teams to really own this and emphasize the importance around not just the cyber risks, obviously, but also the over-reliance challenges, the guardrails, how to appropriately use language that will generate non-biased or unbiased material, how to look out for biased material, things like that. So my big takeaway here has been, coming from the concern of employees using these tools maybe incorrectly or inadvertently incorrectly. I think there's an opportunity for learning and development teams to assist in a big way.
Well, I know just as a result of this conversation and then preparing for this discussion, I've thought of new ways that I can use the tools. And I just, over the times and weeks and months ahead, there are going to be so many additional ones uncovered. But then from the business side, all these key takeaways are items that businesses need to be thinking about planning for, to make sure that the power of this is harnessed in the right way. So Joan, Dave, thank you for joining me for this conversation. I hope those of you who joined virtually got a few tidbits on how you can use this technology, and we'll be talking more about it in the future. Thank you.
Thanks.